Happy virtual Pride, everyone. My name is Sabrina Samuel. I am the secretary for Pride this year. And with me tonight, we're having a little fireside chat. Randy from our board is here, Randy P., and he's our education chair. Ashley is in charge of social media and communications. Bobby Joe is the media spokesperson for us and the vice chair of the board. And we're so happy to have PamRocker here, activist, author, all around great person. And I'm going to hand it over now to Randy to give us more on Pam.
Thank you. And thank you, Pam, so much for joining us. Pam is a buddy of mine. We've worked together on previous projects. I'm really pleased to bring her virtually into Red Deer tonight. I'm just going to read from Pam's biography on Facebook because it says better than I can. Pam is an American Canadian, an LGBTQ plus thought leader and speaker. Pam is an atypical activist and performer who uses humor and personal stories to foster equality and to explore sometimes controversial topics with a rare talent to depolarize issues and gather people around common goals. She works and consults with faith communities, businesses, arts organizations, and consults with individuals and families. Pam was recently chosen as one of the top 40 under 40 in Avenue magazine in Calgary and has been heavily featured in the media, is a panelist for CBC's Unconventional panel and board chair for Broadview magazine. Also, Pam recently was sort of leading the charge for the ban on conversion therapy in Red Deer, and I mean in Calgary, and kind of, I think she sort of ran herself into the ground doing that. So I'm glad she had a little bit of downtime and is able to come and talk to us tonight and about a variety of stuff, but specifically, I think we need to talk about the conversion therapy ban in Red Deer that has been requested over and over again. And I just want to clear the air a little bit quickly. It's not that mayor and council have refused or have done nothing. In fact, they put forward 5 motions, all of which passed overwhelmingly. They did not pass a ban municipally. However, they did endorse heavily a ban at the provincial and the federal level. And currently there is a federal ban tabled by the Prime Minister, and we're just waiting for that. So I think that's enough talk out of Randy for a while, but please welcome PamRocker.
Thank you so much, folks. That's a really lovely introduction. And I've only had a couple of chances to, work with events that Central Alberta Pride has been a part of, but I always get so excited to see what y'all are up to and inspired by the work that you do and excited for this conversation and everything that will unfold in our dialogue today.
Thanks so much. So I guess I'll start, and just to Randy's points and question, how are things in Calgary? We know that you've worked tirelessly there on banning gay conversion therapy, and I hope that's a good start for you, a good starting point for us here.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. For those who may not know who are watching, I'll say a little bit about what conversion therapy is, because this is sort of the things that I talk about all the time, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't know about and I need a little refresher. So if this is your first time hearing about conversion therapy, basically it's any, whether it's talk therapy or any mode or practice to try to get folks who are either transgender or gay or bisexual to live as a heterosexual or live as a cisgender person. So it's any sort of therapy or conversation or program that's seeking to orient you towards something that you're not. So usually this is about, acting or being heterosexual or acting or being cisgender. So conversion therapy is sort of an umbrella term, and there's other terms for it as well, such as SOGICE, which is sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts. So it's ever evolving lexicon around that, just as we have in our queer community, but that's sort of just the catch-all term that we use for any attempt to change who we are. One of the things that's been exciting that's happened in Calgary in the past 6 months or so is conversation around banning conversion therapy in Calgary, and also really robust bylaws that would make it actually enforceable. So a question that I get a lot is, you know, does conversion therapy even happen anymore? You know, isn't that something that happens, you know, only in Texas or something? Or, and I can say that because I'm from Texas, so I can make fun of Texas, it's fine. Or is it something that just sort of happens, you know, where people, you know, sometimes somebody gets sent off to a camp and, you know, it's sort of mysterious. And, you know, unfortunately, obviously those things still happen, but conversion therapy is very, very common still, even here in Canada. So even in Calgary, we have a list of at least 20 churches that perform some form of conversion therapy, and that doesn't include.
Could you give us an example? Like, I know you were talking about it being an umbrella term, so like, could you give us an example of kind of more severe sort of conversion therapy type of situation?
Yeah, so you mean like the methods that are used?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there used to be more physical interventions. So they would do shock therapy. That still does happen sometimes as part of treatments. There would be other, you know, very, very intense, you know, punishments and, you know, beatings and stuff like that. Now it's more often what I would call modern conversion therapy, which is, you know, for example, people have to, you know, it's sort of treated like an addiction. Like you have to confess any thought that you have. So let's say if somebody was trying to do that for me, I would have to confess any thought that I had about a woman. I would have to keep a really detailed journal so that I could confess those things. Sometimes they do a lot of like role play or reenactment of different situations in order to sort of divert what you would want to do or what you did into something that they would consider more religious or holy. Sometimes there's reenactments of sexual assault scenarios in terms of, you know, trying to get the person to, you know, quote unquote heal, because sometimes sexuality is blamed on something that's happened in somebody's past. And often it's very rigorous, what I would call rigorous spiritual abuse. So it's sort of putting any sort of theology or practice at work in order to shame somebody for thinking how they think and being who they are. Often with, you know, sometimes if it is a retreat program, you don't get to take part in certain parts of it if you know, haven't reached a certain level of quote unquote behavior. So there are textbooks, there are, you know, things that churches buy online, you know, 12-step programs for people who are, you know, sexually or gender confused and that sort of thing. So I would say way more often it is a psychological tool, which, you know, we've shown statistically can be just as damaging as a physical intervention.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Does that help explain it a little bit more?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, I've worked for the past 10 years or so in the intersection of the, you know, queer communities and faith communities and all that. Randy, did you have something?
I just wanted to mention, you know, on a local level, we know that conversion therapy has happened and is happening here. There's cases I've heard in the last 3 years that have happened. You know, it's been my experience growing up and living my whole life in Alberta. It happened to me religiously on a very sort of a passive level. However, I also was offered, you know, 30 years ago, a very aggressive psychological approach, which used electric shock.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, we did not go for that, but that was offered to us for $10,000 US 30 years ago.
Right.
You know, so you have to fly to the States to get that done. But, no, just so as people understand that this isn't some airy-fairy idea that happens in the southern states. I mean, it's going on in central Alberta, and has done for years and years.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think, you know, sort of when we talk about it these days, I'm sure some of y'all have seen the movie Boy Erased. That's sort of a retelling of somebody's true story about going through conversion therapy. And that was more like a day program that he went to. And there were a lot of physical things that happened there. And I think in a way it's really good because people see really viscerally what conversion therapy can be. And in another way, it can be misleading in a sense, because if we don't see those things or hear about those things happening, we can think, well, maybe this doesn't happen anymore. I'm sure a lot of the folks who are watching this and on this conversation, you know, understand that that's not the case. But I think the average Canadian, in my experience, why would we want to think that this is something that still happens? I mean, it's really awful, right?
And it's out of sight, out of mind, right? So it's easier to kind of not deal until it's right in your face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I find, you know, I try to really stress that it can happen in lots of different ways. And, you know, basically if you're in a situation where you feel like somebody is continually trying to change something about who you are, you know, recommending reading or sessions with a certain therapist or with the minister, you know, inviting you to addiction type workshops, you know, and that kind of thing around your sexuality or your gender identity. Often that's, you know, that's what's going on. And they never call it conversion therapy. In fact, they often get quite litigious when you do call it conversion therapy, because now they've really changed their wording from things like we can cure you, or we can help change you, or we can do that, into we will help you live the life that Jesus wants you to live, or we will help you, you know, have holy, biblically sound relationships, right? So they've changed the wording a lot to get around this idea of, you know, cure or change, and try to say, well, we're just helping people do what they already want to do anyway.
What they want to do. That's interesting. I really love that you're here with us because, as we all know, our environment is quite different. And I think Bobby Joe and I are talking to somebody already, like, we are an hour and change away from you, Pam, but we're miles away, right? Like in the way that we think, in our local culture, you know, in different levels of everything. And I believe religion plays a lot into that here. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of faith communities around this region. And it has definitely impacted and influenced our community. And so I'm really excited to hear you talk about that intersection where the rubber meets the road, and, you know, faith and sexuality meet, I guess. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. I mean, we see this often, right? I mean, where there's a lot of concentration of, you know, a certain kind of religious ideology, which, you know, I'm hearing from y'all, and this is sort of, I think it's true for a lot of places, but, you know, Southern Alberta, we tend to have a certain reputation for being more on the conservative side of religious ideology. And unfortunately, you know, I've seen in my work, you know, still about 80 or 90% of prejudice against LGBTQ2S plus people is religiously motivated. And so we do see a higher incidence of, you know, hate crimes and, you know, just discrimination in general against queer folks when there's a higher concentration of that more conservative religious ideology. And what's, you know, obviously, other than just at face value, that's really awful, what's extremely upsetting to me about that fact is the sense that I know, as somebody who identifies as a gay Christian, that healthy religion helps us to be more of who we are and not less. And so somehow we've gotten away from this idea that religion can be a tool of liberation, and continue to sort of fall down, you know, for the past decades for sure, this path that, you know, only heterosexuality is holy, right? And we see that manifest, for example, in cities like Red Deer, because I know that there's lots of churches there, and, you know, I think maybe 2 affirming churches, but I think 1 that's, you know, right in the city limits. And what we see there is, you know, the thing that is really detrimental to all of us is a lack of belonging, So when you grow up in those religious environments, no matter what your identity is, there is something inside of you and inside all of us that wants to belong. I mean, that's our core feeling, that's our core desire. And something that religion can offer is a sense of community, is a sense of shared purpose, is a sense of, we're all believing the same thing and we're going towards the same thing. And all of those things as values can make you feel grounded and have a sense of meaning. Now, that can only last for a certain amount of time until you feel like maybe there's something about who you are or what you believe that might land outside of the ideology that you're a part of. Now the world totally changes for you because you know how you're expected to believe and how you're expected to behave within this community. And belonging is predicated on the first two. You have to behave, you have to believe, and then you can belong. And so when you start pushing against any of those things, often you experience extreme consequences because it simply is not, you have to follow certain things in order to still belong. And that's why I think a lot of people actually are very susceptible to conversion therapy, because in that context, if you feel like your community, which often you feel like this is the only one that I might be able to have access to, is going to be taken away from you and you're going to be exiled, spiritually, emotionally, physically, and whatever way, no matter what age you are, it actually can seem really appealing to change something, to have the illusion even of changing something about yourself, because then you will feel acceptable to the people who are around you.
And do you think, Pam, like from, your experiences right at this intersection, like, do you think that that's mainly family based? Like the kids that experience this type of therapy, they go through it and they feel they're going to lose their families?
That's definitely, pardon the pun, but that's the one that hits closest to home in terms of, that's who we are usually primarily influenced by if we have a really religious family and we grow up with this sense of belonging within inside of this unit that seems inherent to us, and then the possibility of being kicked out of this unit, right? Because whether or not yeah,
for sure. Ashley, did you grow up in a religious home? I did.
Yes, actually, I did. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist and a very small community back in BC, 700 people, and I think our community had like 6 or 7 churches, so a very religious-based community. And I grew up listening to conversations from friends and family and stuff, and hearing people say, oh, that's too bad that they're gay and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I guess I'm never coming out. Like, I've known since I was 9 or 10 years old. So for me, it was more about hiding who I was because I was scared I was going to lose people, especially in such a small community.
Yeah. And I would say similarly, I mean, that's an example of sort of self-conversion therapy, right? I think a lot of times we grow up with the tools that we need to perform that on ourselves because we see that it's simply not acceptable, or we hear language over and over again that reinforces this idea that, number one, we're different, and number two, it's not going to be okay if we talk about it. And I remember, for example, Ashley, I'm sure that you can relate with this in some way. I remember hearing when I was 10 or 11, a family, like one of my childhood pastors saying that the unforgivable sin was homosexuality, right? And from that moment, for many years, I decided, well, I'm never going to do this unforgivable sin because in its name, it's unforgivable, right? Now, since obviously I've learned that was really lazy theology and it's completely not true. But those things can really impact you, for many years later. And again, really healthy religion can be a source of really great community and social change. And so, that's why I'm really invested in having these conversations that bring, two seemingly dichotomous issues together. Because we're all spiritual people in one way or another, however we might practice that. And, my goal is that we can all experience meaning in the ways that resonate with us without any question about whether we belong, right? That there's nothing at stake. There's no consequence on the other side. And
so how have you been bringing this message to the faith communities that you work with? Like, how's that go, Pam?
Yeah. And I mean, in creative ways, so I've done, different work in the past 10 years. That's, whether I work sort of inside certain churches and do lots of, awareness work, advocacy, run peer groups for LGBTQ faith identified folks, working with different theater companies to have conversations and do shows that have to do with these intersections. And I do a lot of consulting with churches and faith leaders as well, because I do think that there is more of an appetite than we might think of people of faith who want things to change and who are curious about what that looks like, but who literally have maybe no one else in their church or no one else that they really know who would lead that with them. And they often feel very alone and isolated. And so part of my work, I think, is trying to find ways to get to folks who do want to create change, but maybe feel like they're the only one in their city, the only one in their church or whatever, who wants to create these things.
To do it, yeah.
And then also, institutional change, at large. So a lot of times, obviously being involved politically in things, but, working on a bigger level in, church policy and government policy and saying, how can we have some sort of harm prevention tools? Because in the meantime, well, churches, I think slowly shift and I hope evolve towards a better way of being and actually taking care of people like they are God's children, because we all are. How do we do some harm reduction so that way there isn't as much spiritual abuse and invitations to hide yourself and to, be ashamed of who you are, and that we can get back to a place where, we can not just tolerate, but celebrate who people are. So, and I do a lot of sort of one-on-one resourcing with queer identified individuals as well, because, I know that for myself, I came out 11 years ago and I was 27. And it wasn't until that, really I started coming out till I even had any idea that there was such a thing as a gay Christian. And I thought, I was going to come out and I would still, be a person of faith, but I kind of thought I'm going to have to go this alone. Right. Mm-hmm. And because I was in such a sheltered, religious community, I felt like literally I thought to myself, I'm going to have to move to San Francisco. I'm going to have to move somewhere. Yeah. Really, I was like, okay, it's either Toronto or San Francisco. I'm going to have to move somewhere where I can actually meet one other Christian or go to a church or anything like that. So, I think I hope that in my work of being really public and doing what I call public theology is being who I am in the public square and claiming all of the identities that come along with who I am, that I fought really hard to keep intact over all these years, that, hopefully that will make people feel less alone. So that way, even if their journey is shortened just a little bit from what mine was, that they're able to come out a little bit sooner or experience a little bit more self-acceptance in who they are.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, but it is interesting work and it's very tender work. We all know that as soon as we start having a conversation, we all have a story or know a loved one who has a story of, a way that religion has impacted them for better or for worse. And so,
and usually it's a bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a background of religion, I can say for myself, those things that you mentioned earlier, the community elements and the gathering and all of that stuff. I mean, that's good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and then there's always those conflicting messages, and there's a lot there, good and bad. Randy,
Yeah.
Story. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I also wanted to mention that historically in Red Deer, there used to be a group it was a 12-step group called Gay Anonymous. And I have a few friends who did attend that. And by the way, it was not successful. They're all out today. But that happened. Also in Red Deer, last time I counted, there's 54 churches in town. And one of the more passive ways that conversion therapy works is they used to tell us to pray the gay away. That
Right.
was, that was probably a little less intrusive, a little less torturous, but still as damaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's another thing I think really needs to be spoken to. Conversion therapy brings in guilt and shame issues, particularly for youth. And that's why the suicide risk is so high
Mm-hmm.
in our community, because of that guilt and shame that is infused. And I mean, it really has no place, because it's not a choice. This
Mm-hmm.
is the mistake that I think a lot of people made. I was a married man, I had a wife and we had a beautiful home. We had great lives, but in good conscience, I could not continue that.
Mm-hmm.
It cost me a lot
Yeah.
to do this, but it was the right thing. It's the
Yeah.
right thing to do. And, that's just, and I also, a couple of points I wanted to make that, last year, our painted crosswalk suffered vandalism.
Mm-hmm.
We have discovered, the parties responsible for that, and we're working on an investigation with our CMP right now on that. They're making some progress. So it's not something, that you're going to get away with. We're not going to be bashed anymore. And I think the final point that I wanted to make was that our Pride Week started here yesterday morning with a Pride service at Gates Memorial United Church downtown. That was the first time we've met live since COVID started. And, it was a beautiful service. And the point is that we're trying to create a safe space for LGBTQ2S people. It's the more safe places we have, the more that Red Deer can be a home and inclusive the way it should be, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not a bunch of hillbillies here. We're a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of young people, smart people, hardworking people, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't deserve that brand that we have had for the last several decades.
Right.
You know,
And I really like the point that you said about, creating safe spaces, or, I would even say safer spaces, or spaces that, one of the things that I take really seriously is this idea that a religious attack requires a religious response, right? So as somebody who identifies as a Christian, it's also my responsibility to respond when other people who call themselves Christians are hurting my community or hurting other communities that I may not even be a part of. And so I really appreciate, Randy, the work that you do and the work that Gates Memorial does, and lots of other people of faith who I know are really active in Red Deer and in Southern Alberta, Central Alberta, who take really seriously this idea of, not letting faith and religion be claimed by people who use it to justify and even glorify spiritual violence against other people. And, I think we really do have something as people, who do identify as people of faith, whatever that might be. We have a huge responsibility, because people in our communities are really hurting, and their reticence to be involved in any sort of a religious community is completely understandable, considering a lot of people's histories. And it's really exciting, actually, to be able to disrupt the narrative that in order to be religious, you have to be discriminatory, right? Because that narrative isn't
Go,
true.
Pam, go. Yeah. That's awesome.
And, I think, I know that, when, different things have happened to the queer community, over the years that I've witnessed, even globally, or, we think about different shootings that have happened and different things that have been motivated by queer phobia, transphobia, gender phobia, all kinds of things. Often underneath that is, some sort of a, really misguided sense that religion prefers certain people over others. And, often, people say, like, how can you still be a part of something that's so that stands for so much pain for so many other people? And what I say is, that's a really good question. Because there have been some times where, you know, I hear politicians or religious leaders saying truly awful, awful things about queer folks. And I know that the things they're saying are going to have really intense ripple effects on the people who take them seriously. And I know that, you know, sometimes it's really hard for me to have any sort of a religious organization on my business card or on my website, you know, that I work with, because often I am really ashamed, and it's really painful to see those things happen. At the same time, you know, the reason that I was able to get through my coming out journey is actually because of my faith, you know, and I knew that, you know, without my faith, my life wouldn't be fulfilling, but without being open about who I was, my life would be devoid of integrity. And actually my faith calls me to have integrity. And so my faith called me to come out and to be who I was, and sustained me in the times, you know, Randy, you talked about how much you lost, right? This was not a fun process for you. And so, you know, when I look at that and I look at what I was told for those 27 years, that I couldn't be myself, I couldn't have faith and be gay, I couldn't have access to God and be who I was. And in order to get through that, I really realized that nobody else can tell me who I have access to or not. Nobody else can tell me that I have to fracture myself in order to belong, which also means that because some other religious person is using discriminatory, lazy theology or misinterpreting scriptures in order to, you know, punish or shame people in the queer community, I'm not going to give up what I believe and how I identify, because they are using it for bad. They're using it for, you know, in really unhealthy, harmful ways. I'm still going to claim what I believe to be true, and be even louder and, you know, hopefully way more intentional and loving about it, because no one, you know, I decided a long time ago, no one can tell me what I have access to, and which parts of my personality and which parts of my identity are valid. So I think it's important to do both. I really mourn and have a lot of grief and am conflicted about how much harm religion does. And at the same time, I know that for so many of us, it's not an option. This is something that is rooted within us. You know, it's meaningful to us for the rites and rituals of it, or whether we just pray on top of a mountain or, you know, go to church 4 times a week or whatever. And so I'm much more invested in how do we live these things out in a way that has integrity and is life-giving, rather than trying to eradicate religion as a whole. And I'm not going to let, you know, other folks take away that part of my story either, right?
Very cool. I like what you had to say about not fracturing yourself, because that isn't belonging, really. It's fitting in, and that's quite a difference, quite a jump from belonging. And so, Pam, and then I'm going to pass it over to everyone else, because I've been doing a lot of asking, but I just want to know one more thing. So if we had some takeaways from you today, just in terms of the activism side of things and how we can just in our small ways, and maybe you have some significant ways, we can keep fighting the good fight here and keep trying to understand one another. Just some takeaways, some tips. What do we do, Pam?
Well, I mean, first I would want to say out loud that I'm sure that I and we have a lot to learn from y'all, you know, because I think often in smaller centers, people are more tenacious and less apathetic about change that needs to happen, because you don't have the luxury of anonymity. And, you know, and there is a lot more of a sustained and organized, you know, effort to have the things that sometimes in bigger cities we can take for granted. And so I do want to say that out loud, because I completely believe that's true, that often I learn a lot more from people who are doing activism work in smaller places, because it takes
a need for it here for sure.
There's a lot of need for it, and there's a lot of inherent risk being part of it. And, you know, that's true for lots of locations, whatever the size. But I just want to say that, because You know, sometimes people in bigger cities are like, well, they should learn from us. And I'm like, often I'm like, right. In many things. So, I mean, I just want to honor the work that y'all are a part of and that you've done, and so many people have come before you to create, you know, as open of a space for you to continue that work. The other things that I would do, you know, if there are allies who are, you know, joining us in this conversation, I would say it's extremely important to be involved politically, to be involved religiously in these conversations. I think often, you know, we are expected as people in the queer community to sort of always be saying, you know, this is what we need, this is what we need, this is what we need. And we have to keep doing the work out of survival and because we care about each other. But especially if you're inside of any sort of institution or faith community that still has very problematic theology, it is your responsibility to create change from within that institution. It's not our responsibility to come in or to remain inside of a faith community that is harmful to us. And so, you know, often people will say to me like, you know, I just wish that not all the gay people would leave church because then we can't, you know, create any change. And I say, well, some people continue.
That's how I feel about them in Red Deer. Don't leave. Don't leave.
Don't leave Red Deer. We need you.
Yeah.
And you know, and I get that to a certain extent, right? But when it comes to, you know, spiritual communities, if it's something that is just draining you and you feel like you have to always explain who you are, defend who you are, or know every single theological argument perfectly or whatever, that's not a safer space for you. And so I think for allies, it's really important that if you choose to stay within these certain institutions, your responsibility is very high in terms of, you know, not being a part of something that's going to continue to harm us, and to know that your voice is actually really critical in those things. And I would say, you know, y'all have talked about the ways that you've been active politically as well. And I would not ever underestimate any sort of political effort or conversation that happens. I think when you do bring things forward in a way where there's any sort of policy or law around it, no matter how, you know, quote unquote symbolic it may be or whatever, a conversation that reminds all of us that certain people who we have at large dehumanized, that reminds us that we are all human and we are all valid and we all deserve to live and love and flourish in our society, is never a wasted one. So however the cards fall at the end of the day, we're going to see setbacks and we're going to see challenges and all those sorts of things. But I think to remain politically active as much as you can within your own spheres is really important. And I would say, you know, in the work that we did in Calgary, there were so many people, especially younger people, who contacted us and who said, you know, they were in maybe a smaller town or, you know, didn't have a lot of people around them who they would consider being affirming of who they are. And they were really encouraged by all of these people speaking out in support of the bylaw, because they thought, I didn't even really realize that anybody cared about me.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And, you know, so never underestimate that when you have the chance to do those things, they are going to be people who for the first time don't feel alone, who for the first time think somebody's, you know, maybe they're not in a place to do that fight right now. Maybe they can't be out for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's going to be extremely, extremely powerful to them. And so, and that's one thing that I tell, you know, people doing activist work all the time is it can be extremely isolating work, even if you're working with a great team, because we're working uphill, we're working against societal norms that have been entrenched for so long. And it's really tiring, and it's really tiring, especially when it's personal to us. Right. And yet that's what makes us so tenacious and passionate about it, because it is personal to us. And so just know that, you know, the work that you're doing, small, big, whatever, has a really huge impact. And I can't tell you how many people that I've ran into that have been touched by something that somebody said to them once, you know, who spoke out loud and who, you know, spoke some light into the darkness. And that shifted and changed everything for them in that moment. And what I would say, you know, third and last, or whatever that I think of too, is, you know that you can find your community wherever you are. You know,
Yeah.
if you haven't found them yet, then keep looking, because no matter how small the town, no matter what, no matter if it has to be an online, you know, group, no matter whatever, there are people out there who will accept you exactly as you are, who will help you and walk along with you on your journey, who will understand the different complexities that you bring into the world, and the different, you know, like, you know, that you don't want to fracture different things about who you are in order to belong. So, you know, don't give up, because those people exist. And I came from working at the biggest mega church in Canada. That definitely was not affirming. Which church?
Yeah.
Center Street Church in Calgary.
Oh, cool. I've heard of that one. Did you say they're not affirming, or they are affirming?
They're not.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, you know, I came from that sort of environment to the weird queer faith work that I do now. So anything's possible in my mind, about, you know, the change that we can create by just being who we are. So
cool.
that's all I have for advice, quote unquote, at the moment.
Thank you.
But
Bobby Joe, what do you got? And while she gets her mute off, I just wanted to apologize for not giving everyone's pronouns at the beginning. I see she's got hers on her title there, as well as you do, Pam. But anyway, Bobby Joe.
Thank you so much, Pam. That was amazing. It was a pleasure to hear you speak. And I learned so much this evening. One of the biggest things that I've always remembered in our community is that not every minority is expected to be an advocate for the cause. And so if you find one that isn't willing to be an advocate, just go easy on them, because it's hard. It's hard work. It's hard doing the advocacy that we do, and it's hard always climbing that hill. And the worst part is sliding down to the bottom when you get knocked down and having to go back up, because the work isn't over and our community still needs us.
yeah.
Randy, Ashley, any more questions for Pam?
I just have a comment. I would just like to add that, you know, have hope. If you are questioning or worried or in a place of darkness right now, have hope, because, you know, when I was a kid, it was illegal to be gay. They could put you in the mental hospital for being gay. You could get fired from your job and all that. You know, it was a terrible thing. And look where we are today, you know. And yesterday, we had the proclamation at City Hall, and the mayor was there and did the proclamation along with several council members. And in addition to that, there was an NDP MLA, Janice Irwin, attended. So, you know, we have a lot of support. So, you know, the reminder for me all the time is to listen to the PamRockers of this world, and don't listen to the hating, because that can really take you down. And I'm just so blessed to be a part of this whole thing in Red Deer. And I love it here. I've lived in Edmonton and Calgary, and, you know, this city's being really good to me, and have hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ashley?
More just a comment again too, I guess. I just really appreciate this conversation. I mean, growing up Christian, like you said, like the self-conversion therapy was more where my battle was. It was just that inner guilt and shame based on what I was what I was hearing growing up. I've only been out for 2 years, but I do have to say, like, even though my church as a whole isn't an ally or affirming, there are a lot of people within it who are. And I have a lot of friends and a lot of people who've known me my entire life and seen my struggle with depression and everything else related to knowing I was gay, who were just happy that I was happy. And we're like, you know what, no wonder you have been hurting all these years. Like, I am so sorry that you had to feel that way, you know? And so, yeah, like to tag on with Randy, like there is hope, and just be yourself, be who you are. And there are people out there who are going to love you through it. And I think that that's my goal in being part of the board and being so fresh and new. Like, I'm learning every single day too. Like, I'm a baby gay, I guess is what you'd say, but like, you know, I'm learning so much. But my goal is to be a voice towards, you know, for the Christian community. And I do call myself a gay Christian woman. Like, that's what I say. And like, to people who say you can't have both, I don't agree. But I can still be kind to all those people too. Like, that's the biggest thing, being kind, but being who I am, you know? So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be a part of the board, and just, I'm excited to see where it's going to go. So
Grow like a baby does.
Yeah.
So Pam, what would you tell a miniature version of you? What if there's a Pam out there who's watching this, a younger version of yourself, what would be the message? Your baby gay, we'll say.
My little baby gay. Oh man, my hair should have given it away. I'll tell you what, I had some good mullets happening when I was 8 and 9. You know, it sounds really simple, but I would just say, you know, you're not alone. And I know that you feel different. I know that you look around and it's really hard to see yourself in anybody. You definitely can't see yourself in somebody who, you know, your loved ones respect and admire. But one day you're going to be in a place where you can see yourself. You can see yourself and people around you. And you really will be able to see yourself in the mirror finally, maybe with the right haircut or, you know, whatever that might be. And that through it all, you know, you can never be lost. You can only be found. And that no matter what people tell you on your journey, about how far astray you will be or anything like that, that you're not alone. And there's something that's bigger than you and bigger than any other force in the universe that loves you, and that's going to be there alongside you all this time. And find the people, you know, do your work to find those people who are going to see you and see you for who you are in the quirky, weird, you know, ways that you unfold into being as only you can uniquely be. And you know, I would say what Ashley said is, you know, don't give up. There's a really beautiful world out there, and you know, sometimes just existing is the biggest act of activism that we can do. And sometimes that's all we can do, and that's okay.
Oh, now we're all crying, Pam. Thanks a lot. That was fantastic. Does anyone else have anything before we sign off? I guess I should give a few announcements then, and if I forget any, let me know. So we are super grateful that you watched to the end of this. If you liked it, please share it, and we'd love it if you commented as well. And we have some swag nowadays, and you can go to centralalbertapride.ca and check all of that out, as well as we do have a GoFundMe going for any donations that you'd like to make for Pride and our different events. And how else can people get involved, Bobby Joe? On the Facebook channel, right?
Yeah, follow us on Facebook. Check out our website. Keep up to date on what's going on. I know this year, because of the pandemic, we aren't really needing volunteers this year. The board is going to do most of the work to put on virtual Pride, but in the years to come, we'll still need volunteers. We'll still need our allies, our family, our LGBT brothers and sisters. So please just keep checking our Facebook, our website, and also don't forget to tune in this Saturday for the Pride in the Park and the drag show Saturday night. It's going to be so much fun.
Perfect. I think we all have time to get ready for our makeup lesson too tonight. Who's giving the makeup lesson? I can't remember. Anyway, there's a lot going on for Virtual Pride. Please check it out again, centralalbertapride.ca. PamRocker, you just rockered my world here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, folks.
This is fantastic.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Yes, happy Pride.
And we're out. Thank you.